court system. That's where law comes in. And when it comes to even to the Scofflaw, the impounds, they are very actively involved in law department in order to get the vehicles back. So police department is, this whole Scofflaw program is for the police department. It's a tool for them to have additional enforcement available that they can use at their call. And so the traffic unit is really the ones unit, traffic unit in particular, but all of the, they can use Scofflaw program as they see it applies day to day. They are the enforcers. And the rest of us are in the background, only called upon when needed. So, all right, I thought this on slide 3. Scofflaw program goes way back in time, 12 years, and there's quite a few assembly members that are brand new to the assembly. So, and actually, I don't think there's anybody on the assembly who was back here 12 years ago serving on the assembly. So I thought I'd give a little bit of a quick history on where this came from, and then we'll keep going from there. So the state law, the city went before the state, asked for a law because we recognized there were drivers that continued to get additional infractions and would never pay. And it was completely out of control. We had no consequence, no incentive at all. And so the state law was passed that gave a local option to municipalities like Anchorage to have an impoundment or an abatement ordinance, which would then have a further consequence for those very serious violators. And so it was rooted in public safety. It was signed by Governor Palin. Immediately after it was passed, the Assembly at the time created a very detailed implementation ordinance. It's 9.28 is where it is. And it says that any motor vehicle operated by a person who has delinquent traffic fines in excess of $1,000 is going to be subject to impoundment. And this is a fine, and they define traffic fine in the code as a moving violation. And that's really what our code, our ordinance is all about, is we're just trying to clarify that definition. And we'll explain why that even came about. And these people that we talk about, we actually gave a name to the group. It's Scofflaw. Scofflaw is a very old term. I'd never heard of it until it got created at the city. But it means a person that has complete disregard for the law. They have no intent of ever following the law, ever facing a consequence, and they therefore are on the Scofflaw list. It represents about 1% to 2% of the driving public, so it's not a very large group. The actual quote from the code, this is the implementing code, says the purpose of abatement is to remove motor vehicles operated by repeat traffic offenders who have not been subject to the deterrent and rehabilitative effects of sentencing, and who therefore pose a heightened danger to the public. The purpose of abatement is not to generate revenue. So this is about public safety. It is not about revenue. All right. We go on to the next page. You may ask, well, why do we even have an ordinance? Why did it come to the Assembly? The reason why is in 2018, there was an appeal case, and it went to the administrative hearing officer. And I believe the police department testified, the Treasury may have testified, and ultimately an opinion was written by the hearing officer. And in her opinion, she wrote, and this is a quote at the tail of her opinion, I recognize that the meaning of a moving violation, which is not defined in AMC 928 or elsewhere in the code, is not a model of clarity or precision. It's a nice way of giving us some feedback. Members of the public and APD could benefit from revisions to the code that reduce the potential for confusion and misinterpretation of this term. So that's where this originated, is the term moving violation. What does that mean? And how does that fit into the Scofflaw and the whole implementation of Scofflaw? So that is where this originated. Right away, Law Department helped draft an ordinance, and they coordinated with police and with Treasury, and ultimately that's the ordinance that came to the Assembly. In that ordinance, the one that's before you for next Tuesday night, it is very simple, it's a very narrow focus, and it simply tries to clarify the definition. It clarifies that a moving violation is any violation of a vehicle law committed by the driver while the vehicle is moving. That's the way it's defined. It also makes sure to clarify that it includes what a layman's term might consider paperwork and equipment violations. Okay, so I think later on when you hear from the Ombudsman, you'll hear a fair amount talked about, well, should those be in or out? And so it's specifically, the way the ordinance is presented to you, it does include that, and that's because those are rooted in public safety, and we'll cover that in a little bit. These include issues or citations such as insurance, registration, licensing, and inspection violations. So it is a very technical change. It's very straightforward. It's not complicated. We're not trying to reopen the world on Scofflaw. Okay, that was not our intent when we put forward the ordinance. Okay, on page, this is slide 5. Why does the program itself exist? We see that traffic violations, traffic citations are all about public safety. That's the reason they were created. It's about public safety. Everything from the smallest infraction, a tail light, to manslaughter. It's all about public safety. So, as I mentioned before, the Scofflaw program was a new program established to provide the police department. They actually, I think it was Steve Smith at the time, testified to the legislature. This is about an additional tool for the police officers to use when they pull a person over. And there are people out there that had an unbelievable amount of unpaid traffic citations, and oftentimes they're involved in other things at the time they get pulled over, right? So that can happen also. But it is basically a form of progressive discipline. It's additional tool, additional discipline that can be applied by the officer at the subsequent infraction by the driver. Okay. The bolded comment, I'm not going to read that there. That's an excerpt from an administration response early made to Assemblymember Zoltel's question. Assemblymember Zoltel asked several very good questions, and we responded. All right, we go on to page 6. This is titled The Long Road to Becoming a Scofflaw. And it really is a long road. I think if you were to read the Ombudsman's memo, it almost gives me the impression that, gosh, I have a broken taillight, next day I'm a Scofflaw. That is not the case. You have to really earn your way to being a Scofflaw, and it takes a long time and many tickets to actually get on that list. And these are tickets that are completely unaddressed. So some tickets involve a fine, pretty much all of them do, but it doesn't mean you end up having to pay the fine, because a huge percentage are fix-it tickets. So you do not have to pay a fine if you fix whatever the violation was. Could be no insurance, could be no taillight, whatever it is. You have an opportunity to fix that. So the evolution here of becoming a Scofflaw is, first and foremost, you start to get your first ticket. Okay, that's the first thing. You break the traffic law. The next is that the fine that you receive gets ignored. Whether it's a fix-it ticket or a pure fine, you choose to ignore it. Then you do that multiple times, over and over and over. And over a period of time, usually years, you eventually get to the point where you owe, on average, 7 to 8 citations, more than $1,000 in value, and now you're deemed a Scofflaw. And so that is an important point, because if you are at $999, you're not a Scofflaw, you're not on the list. You're still a bad driver, okay? However, once you break the $1,000 threshold, the police department has the ability, has the authority to then impound your car if you break a traffic law again. And so the driver and anyone who may be associated with that driver, if you lend your car, that type of thing, there's a lot more. Your day, the day you pass that $1,000 threshold, becomes a riskier day for you going forward. And that's the additional tool, the additional progressive discipline that we're talking about. And so that's where things change once your name is on the list. If you can make a partial payment, pay it down, get back down under $1,000, you're off the list. Okay? You do not have to pay all your fines. You don't have to completely fix all your history in a day. It can be fixed incrementally. But you do have to take action. You do have to make progress, and you do have to be below $1,000. That's the way it's defined. On slide number 7, we point out that a driver does not typically become a Scofflaw through equipment or paperwork violations alone. Again, if you looked at the Ombudsman's memo, you might say, gosh, it's all about people with paperwork fines and they're all going to have their car impounded. That's not reality. Reality is people have a mixture of fines that have not been addressed, not been paid or fixed, and that is actually the profile of a Scofflaw. And in order, if you were to have just fix-it tickets, you'd have to have over a dozen unresolved fix-it tickets to ever get to $1,000. It would be a lot of tickets. And even then, you could be a Scofflaw for the rest of your life, as long as you drive safe enough, and as long as the police department doesn't see you driving not so safe, you're good. You're not going to get your car impounded. So there is a real incentive to, even if you're a Scofflaw, to drive a little bit better in the future, so you don't subject yourself to that additional risk. Okay. Once the cases are accumulate beyond $1,000, they do come to Treasury eventually. The cycle is the person gets the ticket. The officer does it in person. They issue the ticket. It then has a warning period, a notice period from APD, and then it goes to the court system. The court system gives the opportunity for deferred payment, for challenging, contesting the ticket, all that kind of stuff. All that due process occurs. At some point, at an end point with the court renders a judgment, and they pass that judgment on to us. At that point, Treasury receives the case, it's delinquent, and it's a judgment. What we do is we then add it to our list, and every day we refresh the list, and if they've broken $1,000, they're on the special Scofflaw list, and that's how it works. The time period here is, at the earliest, a person would have, let's say you owe $999, 6 tickets, and you just got your 7th ticket, and it's going to take you over $1,000. It's going to be at least 90 days from the date of that ticket before we'll even know that you might be subject to Scofflaw. So there's a lot of time, a lot of opportunity for people to address their situation before they appear on the Scofflaw list. And so that's that. If we talk about specific violations, this is on page 8. Some of the most common ones, and we've got some data from the police department. Speeding, of course, driving without insurance, failure to stop a red light, broken headlight, tail light, stop sign, invalid license, tinted windows. Those are all different common type violations. The top 2, and these are the reason we call this out, because I was very surprised how many there are. Driving without insurance or without proof of insurance, 4,400 of the 23,000 citations that make up Scofflaw. 30%, I'm getting ahead of myself. 4,400 are involving an insurance issue. That's a lot. And that's a serious issue for Anchorage. It's a very serious issue. The next one is driving without a valid license for various reasons. That's also a very serious issue. If you add up those two numbers, that's 8,000 out of 23,000 citations in the Scofflaw list. That's 30% is for those 2 reasons alone. And the reason we're bringing this up is a layman may say, those are paperwork violations. Those are paperwork. And I say, those are serious public safety violations. And I'm going to show later on just how serious those are. Okay, so.
I have a question, actually. Yes. Mr. Peterson.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And I was wondering, since I've never gotten either one of these fines, how much is the fine for driving without insurance and driving with a suspended license?
I don't know. Start deciding to answer that.
Yeah, the fine for no proof of insurance is a $500 fine. It's basically a fix-it ticket. So as long as they show up and they show they had insurance at the time of the stop, it gets dismissed completely.
And what about the license suspended?
You know, I'm not sure on that one. It was a criminal offense, and then it changed to just a violation. I'm not sure what the fine is.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Peterson. Ms. Quinn Davidson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I have a few questions, but
Sure.
feel free if there are some that you want me to wait to tell me that. So I know you said that this isn't about making money, but I think it's a little bizarre that you're giving this presentation then. Can you tell me why you are? And maybe you said that at the beginning.
I was designated by the group, so I've given presentations to the assembly before, and I was asked to do it. So
I just think it sort of presents the wrong image. It's not necessarily your fault. I just don't understand if we're saying it's not.
I also, just so you know, I've been with the city for 27 years, and I actually was there when the bill was passed, and I'm one of the only people that was around at the time that originated. So
in Treasury as well.
Yeah, it was in Treasury.
Because it's kind of back to the same point.
I'll just say to that, Treasury has, back when that bill was passed, we literally gave up on trying to collect. Okay, so our role in this, we felt like we can't do anything more. These people are not going to pay. So again, we're just the keepers of the list. That is our only involvement. So that's where we stand. On other matters, we are about the revenue, about collections, because there's some realistic expectation of getting it, but not in this case. And I'll bring that up later too. So you'll see what I mean.
Want to wait?
Yeah, so I'm just thinking about time management, because I know I want to give plenty of time for Mr. Hess to give his presentation, and I have a list of questions too.
That's fine. And I'll be done in like 5-7 minutes.
Okay.
All right, so we are on page 9, slide 9. This is talking about paperwork and equipment violations, and like I said, in the ombudsman's memo, that's talked about quite a bit. So we thought we'd just mention here what are some examples that might fall under that layman's interpretation of that. And there is no official definition of what is paperwork or equipment violation. Okay. So revoke license, the tail light issue, the tinted windows, all that, driving without insurance. Those are, by some, considered paperwork, but they relate very much to public safety. And even something such as, like I say, tinted windows. An officer approaching a car with heavily tinted windows, that's a safety issue. Tinted windows in a dark community in the wintertime with pedestrians and other cars, that's a safety issue. So there's all sorts of elements here that tie to public safety. And we didn't create the traffic laws. They've been around a long time, and they were established for a reason being public safety. So if you were to eliminate, let's get rid of all, whatever that definition of paperwork and equipment violation, let's just not have that be part of Scofflaw, what would that do? Well, it would diminish APD's ability in a significant way to use this powerful additional tool that they have. It would take about, I think, 40% of the list, it would shrink it down, okay? And in addition to that, the incentive for a person to drive more responsibly in the future would also go away. One day you're a Scofflaw, the next day, hey, I'm off the list, I'm good for however long, I can go drive a little more carelessly, right? That takes away that incentive. Being a Scofflaw is a big deal. It's not something I think anyone likes to know that they could potentially have a car impounded. And the third point is, it's actually unfair to the whole driving public. Why would you allow a really bad driver with a really bad history to all of a sudden have history gone? And that somehow these don't matter anymore, and that they're considered just a non-Scofflaw type driver. So, okay, I will wrap it up here. Just so you know, on page 10, our process when it comes to trying to collect on anything is they always come to us once they're delinquent. They come to us as court orders, and so we're obligated to follow through the collection. We send out a collection letter to all drivers that are delinquent, doesn't matter if they're Scofflaw or not, and in that notice that we give, we include an insert, and I will definitely give a lot of thanks to the Ombudsman's Office, because in 2015, they said, you know what, Scofflaw needs to be more widely known. And so we developed an insert, and every single notice that we send to Scofflaw or non-Scofflaw, doesn't matter, receives an insert saying there is a Scofflaw program, it's all about public safety, and please be aware of this program. And so that's our way of getting it. We've also had the press do a lot of coverage on this over the years, and it's been a good thing. Last point is on, substantive point is on DMV. This is page 11. The top bullet says that the municipality of Anchorage and the state of Alaska, and this is through DMV or through other agencies, we all share the common objective of safer roads and responsible drivers. DMV has their own system, a point system, to deal with driver safety and accounting for that. We have the Scofflaw program. That's how we try to track people and to basically designate are they unsafe drivers. In the manual by DMV on the point system where they describe it, they say the point system is designed to prevent crashes through identification, control, and rehabilitation of recognized problem drivers. That's what we're talking about when we talk about Scofflaw. They are recognized problem drivers. Also in that manual it states it's for moving traffic violations. That's also what we're talking about, okay? And it assigns point values anywhere from 2 to 10 points. Here's where it was really enlightening to us when we did this broad review of the point system that DMV has. If you drive without a license, and that is not a valid license, and that is a paperwork violation in some people's eyes, that's a 10-point ticket according to DMV. That's a very serious ticket, very serious public safety matter. If you commit manslaughter with your vehicle, that's a 10-point ticket. They have those at the same level. That says a lot to me, okay?
Me too.
Yeah. And also, if you drive without insurance, another paperwork violation, that's a 6-point ticket. That's a big ticket in terms of points. Negligent driving is also a 6-point ticket. And then it says all other moving violations, 2-point ticket. So we're quite consistent in terms of our objective. What DMV says, what we do, it's quite consistent. And there's a real seriousness to the driving habits, behaviors, and risk levels that Scofflaw bring. And so that's why Scofflaw exists. The statistics on page 12 are there, just so you're aware of how big of a problem this is. There's a little over 3,000 offenders that are on the list. These are unique individuals. There's 23,000 citations owed, $6 million are unpaid. It's about 40% of all unpaid traffic tickets are Scofflaw tickets. The median amount, so the average, the typical average is $1,500. It's owed 7 citations. Only 2% of Scofflaws voluntarily pay. Only 2%. There is virtually no incentive. There's no expectation that these people will pay. They just don't. In 2018, we collected $117,000. $6 million owed, we collected $117,000. It is not a money issue at all. We have no separate budget that exists for Scofflaw, and we virtually expect no collection on that. Scofflaw is about public safety. That's where it started, and that's where it always has been. And in summary, we drafted the ordinance that came as a result of the hearing officer. That's what started all this. And it's a technical change, narrow in focus, as I mentioned before, trying to provide clarity, transparency to the public. This is basically taking what we've been doing for 11 or 12 years, and it's just clarifying the details of what we're doing. Nothing has changed. So it's not going to change the Scofflaw list, not going to change how it's enforced day to day. The administration recommends approval of the ordinance that comes before you next Tuesday, and I believe at this time, Law had just a quick comment, and so did he, and then we're done. And I appreciate the opportunity to present.
Real quick, I did get clarification. Driver's license fines are $300.
So Jessica, do you want to say something?
Sure. Accessibility from the Department of Law. So with regards to the Department of Law's role in Scofflaw, we provide a public-facing window for folks who have had their cars impounded after being on the Scofflaw list. They sign paperwork to get their car back. We help connect them with the impound yard and help them know about their appellate rights or appeal rights. We also represent the MOA when there are appeals, either to the Administrative Hearing Office or to the Superior Court. My understanding is that there are 2 cases pending in Superior Court and 1 case pending with the AHO. I'm unfortunately not the assigned attorney, so I won't be able to speak in detail about them, in addition to the fact that they're pending litigation. But just so you know, I will answer as much questions as I can, and if I don't know the answer, I will try to get back to you kindly.
Thank you. All right, so I'm going to go ahead and go through my list of questions, and then I will turn it over to you, Mr. Hess. So I have you on the list, Mr. Gates. Oh, sure.
Oh, no,
All right. Ms. Quinn-Davids.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So you mentioned that it's not really clear what equipment and paperwork means. Why would we, in attempting to clarify this, use a definition that's confusing?
I'll try to field that one. In adding to this definition, we understand that moving violation isn't defined at the state level or at the municipality level. Additionally, equipment violations, paperwork violations, I think they're known commonly in the community as a paperwork violation having to do with the paperwork in the car, equipment violation having to do with your vehicle. So we are trying to add some clarification based on that AHO decision that was shared in the past few months. It's not a perfect definition by any means, but I do think it goes into a little bit more detail than what we have right now.
And then one more.
Sure.
Is there a public safety commission or as APD, I mean, I know you're responding to this, I assume APD supports it, did the commission weigh in?
I'm not aware of that. Maybe APD can speak
know that we do have a public safety commission. I believe the chief sits on it, along with the deputy chief. But I don't know how involved they have in this particular ordinance.
Thank you, Mr. Davidson. Mr. Dyson.
Yeah. So I really struggle here. And all my life, I've professionally been in a profession that requires precision, good information, logic, and I live in a world, including this one, where people tend to exaggerate. So when we say, page 5, the Scofflaw acts as a progressive discipline for severe traffic offenders. When it says severe traffic offenders, I think of people that hurt folks, are reckless driving, they're stoned, and they got caught at it. And so then when you use that descriptor with what you call paper things, that's a logic problem with me, and it's a lack of precision using the words. Then you get down here to the end, and it uses an example of consistency, thinking that somebody driving without license or proof of license is exactly the same sort of evil as killing somebody with a vehicle. I am incapable of understanding a logic system that thinks not having proof of license is the same as killing someone. I'm sorry. I run out of vocabulary to describe my cognitive dissonance.
Mr. Chair, could I get in the queue?
Sure. Thank you, Mr. Dyson. Ms. Alatel.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I have two questions. Do we have a breakdown of the demographics of who's on the Scofflaw list by zip code, location in the city, so we can kind of see where people are residing? That would be good to know and kind of get to the issue of maybe potential socioeconomic effects on different groups. And if we don't, could we get it since you have a list and you mail people?
We don't have Scofflaw as we don't capture that data, address data for Scofflaw. We only know it's a person who has X number of citations and X dollars owed. We don't grab any address information. They do get, when they originally get a citation, they get it mailed to their address, but that's one by one. We don't know. We'd have to manually look up 3,300 people to try to find their vehicle.
I think that's a little problematic. And my second question relates to, I guess I don't know, driving without a license, can that lead to impoundment of the vehicle automatically just for that violation?
It can. So if you're just driving without a valid license, somebody who's never gotten one, it is just a violation. You can just get a ticket. If you are driving on a suspended, revoked, or canceled license, it reverts back to the original reason that the license action was taken by the DMV. So if it was because of a DUI, then part of the requirements from the court are that you not drive, and if you are driving, then at that point it can be impounded based on the court order. But those are really far and few between anymore.
I have one last one. Do we know what the personnel costs for keeping the Scofflaw list and trying to recover, to do all of this versus the recovery of $117,000? Like, do we know what we're spending on Scofflaw? I know you said it's not a money issue, but I would really like to know kind of what we're spending versus what we're recovering. I mean, if we're only recovering 2%, I'd just be curious how much we're spending.
Very, very minimal. So it's a lot of it's on my computer. So
well, there's got to be legal time, because if someone's on the list and their car's impounded, there's appeals.
I was just going to
Yeah, so I don't know if someone can kind of find that information out. I would really like to know.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Alatel. Mr. Peterson.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And first of all, I just wanted to remind everyone that the state did pass a permanent vehicle registration law here a few years ago. I don't remember, it was like 12 or 15-year-old vehicles don't have to pay for registration anymore, or 10 or whatever it was. And so what that does in the long run is that keeps cars on the road that are older and maybe wearing out as they're continuing to drive them. And so that sort of encourages people to be on the road with vehicles that may have violations. That was just a statement. But my question is, and this is related to something that Ms. Zalatel mentioned, do we have any idea how many of these people aren't paying because they just don't have the money? And I don't know how you would go about getting that information. But I mean, if you take someone's vehicle away because they don't have the money to pay the fines, chances are if they do have a job, they're going to lose their job. I think we could end up with more homeless on this situation. And so you try to solve one problem, you create 2 or 3 more. Just throwing that out there.
Thank you, Mr. Peterson. Mr. Gates.
Thanks, Mr. Shower. I was going to add some clarification that Officer Stein has. It's interesting that we said the fine for driving without your license is $200. Your Devin Collins says it's collectible $75. But I think $300 is the state statute, general fine. So I don't know who's right. We probably both know. But I also wanted to add some clarification for driving while your license is suspended or been revoked or been canceled. And it's correct, it's a Class A misdemeanor. So the court said sentencing. There's a series of sentences required for a first offense. It's 10 days imprisonment, 10 days suspended. And if you not require offense, it's 10 days imprisonment. And then, of course, the court still has some discretion about set out with the vote. And then finally, the up to $10,000, what they do. And I think like Dr. Society is correct.
No, actually, if I could respond.
Sure.
That all, originally DWLR, so driving with a revoked license or a suspended or canceled license, was a criminal action. But SB 91 changed that and made it a violation unless it meets certain criteria, which has to do with the drunk driving ordinances and what the actual charges are that the judge has come down with. So it actually is just a citation now with a $500 fine. The $75 fine that he's referring to is if you just don't have your license with you, then that's a correctable citation. But if you do not have a license, you've never gotten one, it's a $300 fine with 2 points. So it's changed since that was updated.
And tell us about the costs for processing. And I don't know about Treasury's costs, but when a vehicle is impounded for T1 and driving license, if it's impounded, there's an administrative processing fee. Because the department is not, it's $410, and that's separate from costs of impoundment and so forth. It's $410 fee for storage fees. Plus an administrative charge of $410 department's processing costs for seizures of vehicles based on those violations. So you have to pay that to get your car out of impounding. So it's got things.
Thank you, Mr. Gates. Mr. Weddleton.
A couple of things. I think on these points, just for addressing Mr. Dyson's driving without a license is 10 points and manslaughter is 10 points. I think I came close once about 30 years ago, and I think if you hit 10 points, they take away your license. So if you're driving without a license, it's really no penalty there. So it's not equal to manslaughter. But a couple of questions. How fast is an appeal? And how easy is that?
I'm sorry, with the administrative hearing office?
So it's like 2 days later I can go in and plead my case?
AHO, their turnaround is rather quick. There's a window, I think it's 14 days, during which you can file an appeal and notice is included in the paperwork. I mean, it's right next to our office. People can just slip a piece of paper, and then the hearings are set up within 30 days. And it's set up that way to provide a speedy resolution to these cases, and to provide a less expensive alternative to the court system, which takes much longer to get on the calendar and also has fees for filing.
It's a long time if you need your car, 30 days. But, okay, so that's good, but thank you. So what if it's a borrowed car? stop them, they got $1,000 on their car.
I want to add, with regards to the fines, Scofflaw, they're cumulative, so you would actually have the opportunity to appeal each citation, fine, fee, whatever you're getting. The amounts that contribute to the Scofflaw are judgments. So you have the opportunity to appeal each one before it gets to the judge. With folks that are lending their cars to Scofflaw drivers and get them impounded, they also have to go through the impound process, which they don't have to pay the Scofflaw fine themselves. I believe it's just the retrieval fees that they have to pay.
But if it's not the driver's car, you can still impound it.
I think the case is similar for driving while under the influence. A similar impoundment.
Okay, and then it says here that the officer may seize the car. How would they decide?
I'll let APD answer that. I think that's the language in the code.
Yeah, that is the discretion that's given to the officers, and I know that for me personally, you're judging really the individual. Are you dealing with somebody that has an extensive amount of history that you see running around all the time? You know that, if I give them this citation, everything, it's not going to do any good. That's somebody who's most likely going to get their car impounded versus you stop somebody who, for whatever reason, hasn't been able to pay the citations. They got one speeding ticket that was $1,500. They couldn't pay it, and now they're on the Scofflaw list. That's going to be weighed differently. Also, to get somebody who's got their family in the car, things of that nature, we're not going to take somebody out on the side of the road. These are really the people that are a hazard to the community and that we're dealing with all the time. They're the ones that are really being targeted with this.
Okay. So look at this. So if you get $1,000 worth of traffic fines, whatever kind, you can take your car. We have, I think it's a bigger issue, is we have squatters in homes and people with derelict homes and stuff like that. And we had one that had over $100,000, a couple actually, Francesca, well over $100,000 in fines. It took years to be able to go in and take that property. If we do this, can we do the same thing there?
I'm sorry, I'm not hearing.
Can we, we're here at $1,000 you can take their car, but we have problems with people squatting in houses or just living miserably and breaking all kinds of rules, and they have hundreds of $1,000s worth of fines. Do we have an automatic trigger where we can take their home? We don't.
Well, if you're raising the analogy, I think there is, gosh, and again, I'm not being assigned attorney, but for nuisance properties, there's been a similar process set up whereby you can actually lose your home. And it's a little bit longer of an intensive process.
That's years. Years. Okay. Just hunting to see maybe that's your next project.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Whittleton. So for the purposes of time, I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to Mr. Hess, and then I'll...
Mr. Chair, I was in the queue.
Yes, I know, but I am running out of time, so I'm going to turn it over to Mr. Hess, and then I'll get back to the queue after Mr. Hess.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I appreciate Dan's presentation. He covered a lot of background that I was going to cover. He's absolutely correct. Moving violations is not defined currently in municipal code or state statute, but the Division of Motor Vehicles interprets moving violations as those violations for which the DMV enters points on a person's driving record. And, the points, the more egregious the violation, the more likely that that violation is going to cause a crash or a public safety issue, the higher the point value. And it does say in the driving manual that moving traffic violations, if you're convicted or forfeit bail for a moving traffic violation in the state of Alaska, points will be, or this state or any other state, points will be assessed against your driving record. I think Treasury's interpreting paperwork violations a little bit differently than the Ombudsman's office. We don't believe that driving without insurance is a paperwork violation. We don't believe that driving with a suspended license is a paperwork violation, and neither does the DMV because they assign points to those. And if you do research at different legal websites, those offenses, those violations are generally not considered paperwork violations.
Do you mean moving violation? Or you mean paperwork?
So they're they're not considered moving traffic violations by the DMV
Yes, correct. Okay.
unless points are assigned to that violation.
Right.
So, and when you talk about negligent homicide, you talk about DUI that have, larger, higher point values assigned to them. Those are in many cases criminal offenses. And if you don't pay the fine, we had somebody come to our office, they had a $1,000 fine unpaid for a DUI. They weren't on the Scofflaw list because of that, because criminal violations that are also moving violations do not count towards the Scofflaw. So somebody who commits negligent homicide, somebody who's arrested for DUI and convicted, if they don't pay their fines, those don't count towards the Scofflaw. So we have millions of dollars in the municipality that are owed to the municipality for unpaid criminal and civil violations, but the only ones that we seize personal property for are those who are on the Scofflaw list. And, I would say in my 7 years as ombudsman, we've had multiple complaints regarding the Scofflaw code. And in each of those cases, we upheld the right of the municipality to enforce the Scofflaw. But none of those complainants had raised the issue of what is a moving violation, what should be factored in for that $1,000 threshold. Recently, in the past year, a complainant came to our office and he raised that issue. And I believe he's one of the individuals appealing to the Superior Court. And he raised the issue with us of what is a moving violation, what should be calculated in. And when we looked into his concerns and we did research, we became concerned that including paperwork, interpreting equipment paperwork violations to be moving violations for purposes of the Scofflaw code could disproportionately impact low-income individuals and affect punishing them for their socioeconomic status rather than their driving abilities. So we're including offenses that the state of Alaska does not believe reflect on somebody's ability to safely and prudently operate a vehicle. They don't assign points to those violations because they don't think that it reflects on somebody's ability to operate a vehicle safely. But we are using that to calculate this $1,000 threshold to potentially seize somebody's vehicle. And I just have to say, reality for many of us in this room who have 5- and 6-figure incomes is very different than the reality for thousands of residents in our community. It's not a simple matter for many of them to pay a $50 or $75 or $100 to replace a headlight. And by the way, many headlights these days you can't buy locally, you have to order them out of state, and most of those companies won't ship to Alaska, so you have to ship them to somebody on the West Coast and have them ship them to you. So for thousands of people, it's not a simple matter to fix-it tickets. These individuals often don't have simple choices. They have to make hard choices. Rent or food, clothes for their kids, rent, food. Unfortunately, replacing a headlight or a taillight in a timely manner or paying the fine for not fixing the problem may not be a viable option for them. They can't pay to fix the problem, so they get a fine. They can't afford to pay the fine. So this starts a vicious cycle for many people who are struggling financially in our community. Their vehicles may not be pretty, they may not have 2 functioning headlights or taillights, but it's what gets them to work. It's what helps them put food on the table and pay their rent. And it's an important personal asset. Interpreting equipment and paperwork violations as moving violations for the purposes of the Scofflaw Code does not serve any compelling public purpose and has unintended consequences for low-income individuals and families. The Alaska legislature recently enacted a new crime bill, and one of the provisions, sponsored by Senator Wielechowski, allows the DMV to suspend an individual's driver's license if they have $1,000 or more in outstanding unpaid fines for moving violations. And so the DMV is going to use their interpretation of moving violation, which is if points are assigned to it by DMV, to enforce the new state scofflaw law. And so we have a scofflaw law in the books that has different criteria, and I think that's just going to be confusing for the public and for those who enforce it. And I just want to note that normally when a government entity expands a definition, it does so to expand or protect rights. In this instance, I believe, our office believes that the municipality's expanded definition of moving violations appears to have negative impacts on property rights. As a home rule city, the municipality can interpret moving violations differently than the DMV, but the question is, should we? Is there a compelling public purpose for the municipality to interpret moving violations differently than the State of Alaska Division of Motor Vehicles? The Ombudsman's Office believes that no such compelling public purpose exists. Our office is charged with advising the Assembly and Mayor regarding the fairness and equity of municipal codes, policies, and procedures. We take that responsibility seriously, and we're very judicious in offering our opinions. We try to be thoughtful and take into consideration how our recommendations would impact the public and municipal government. In my 7 years as Ombudsman, our office has only made a handful of recommendations to the Assembly and Mayor regarding municipal code to make them more fair and equitable. One recommendation was to make handicap parking offenses a correctable offense. One was to add reasonable person standard to the animal noise code, and another was to implement an appeal process for penalties assessed upon late payment of property taxes. And at the time, I would say the departments thought that hell was going to freeze over if these changes were made, but the changes were made. The Assembly enacted the recommendations 11-0, and the municipality continues to function. And I just want to say, it seems like a key responsibility of government at any level is to protect and respect private property rights. Government seizure of private property should only occur to address a compelling public purpose, and our office believes that interpreting moving violations to include equipment and paperwork violations for purposes of the Scofflaw Code is not fair and equitable and does not serve any compelling purpose or need. And we recommend that the Assembly not pass AO 2019-59, and we recommend that the code be amended to enact a definition of moving violations that is consistent with the State of Alaska Division of Motor Vehicles interpretation of moving violations.
Thank you, Mr. Hess. So I have some folks in the queue and not much time. Mr. Constant.
Thank you. The question that I have, and Daryl, maybe I just got confused a little bit. I couldn't quite tell what you were suggesting, that the issues of not having insurance and not having a license are actually considered a moving violation in your opinion?
Yes, they're not paperwork violations.
Right. So an argument that suggests that if we don't do this, it allows people without insurance to drive around, that isn't a good argument. It's invalid. So that actually was a good clarification, because my question would have been, should we divide the question? But thank you. That's good clarification.
Thank you, Mr. Constant. Ms. LaFrance.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Actually, my questions have been answered by Mr. Hess, so I'll pass.
Thank you, Ms. LaFrance. Ms. Salatel.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. With the proposed ordinance, this first sentence, or as we have the new addition, which is any violation, as that goes on, would this new portion now include then criminal traffic violations that we just discussed that aren't currently included on the Scofflaw list?
I don't believe that's the intent. The intent here is to add clarification. We're not changing any MOA policy. We're simply giving the public more notice as to what the Scofflaw fine is.
I mean, why don't we include those others if the intent here is public safety and the ones that Mr. Hess mentioned were pretty unsafe behaviors that resulted in criminal action?
I can't answer that, but I can try to come up with an answer for that question. I would suspect that the car would be impounded through other means.
Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Alatel. Any further questions?
Just note for the record, in trying to collect these things, we can go after their dividends, and they do. And I would suggest that's an effective tool.
Thank you, Mr. Dyson. Okay, seeing no further questions, does the administration want to provide any response? Any final thoughts? Oh, actually, Mr. Peters.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And do you know, you listed how many $100-some thousand worth of fines we collected from these people. Does that count the ones we took their dividends from, or part of their
No,
dividends?
those are voluntary payments. I was just trying to illustrate their willingness to pay fines, and it's very low.
So is there any way to get that information as to how much we collected from these potential scofflaws through taking part of the dividend?
Oh yeah, we can do that.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Peters. All right,
We
seeing
have a
no
comment.
further questions, go ahead.
Just one quick comment. I just want to put out that I was a fatality investigator for 13 years, and having investigated literally hundreds of fatalities, I have investigated fatalities where the driver didn't see a pedestrian because of burned out headlights or because of headlights that were too dim. I've investigated fatalities with bald tires because they lost control on the highway. And those are non-point correctable citations. So the fact that it's being put out there that these aren't public safety issues, I have to disagree, because I've had to go and talk to the families of people that have died. So that's something to keep in mind.
Mr. Chairman?
Yes, Mr. Hess.
I wanted to point out that when the municipality went to the legislature and the assembly in 2007, they provided no empirical data to either to support the contention that people who don't pay their fines are more dangerous and a public safety. So there's never been any data provided to back that up.
Thank you, Mr. Hess. All right, seeing no further questions, work session's over. Let's get ready for the next one.